Hello guys.
Hi, Irfan.
Hi Shashi.
Hi.
Hi Dario. Okay, I guess we can start now. I was expecting uh, either Maru or Paul to be there in the meeting. Ivan, you have any info if they're joining? Paul mentioned to me that he would probably join.
Yeah, Paul is here. He's under the SIG service catalog name.
Oh, okay, fine, cool. Okay, so I did put a couple of items on the agenda today. One, like we were talking yesterday in the SIG multi-cluster sync, that we can reconcile the list of items and the timeline we are thinking about alpha for Federation V2, like first cut alpha or the first release kind of a thing. So Ivan, or you, Paul, you have any update from the list of items which can be put out, or we can probably have issues in the items names? I have some items from Huawei which I'm thinking I'll update as issues.
Yeah, we have a milestone in the repo that we're, I guess, informally started tracking some of the issues that we'd like to accomplish before releasing the first alpha. If
Mhm.
you want to, I think that's probably an okay place. We did that for cluster registry as well.
Mm.
I think, similarly, other projects are doing the same. So if you want to create the issues that you'd like to see accomplished before an alpha release, and then we can discuss them and add them to the milestones as appropriate.
Okay, that sounds okay to me. So probably by tomorrow I'll update the list of issues or the list of items which we want probably to be part of this milestone release. Then we can discuss over the GitHub issues in that case. We don't need to reconcile them here. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I think that's okay. We should probably discuss the alpha issues at some point, but since they're not in there yet, maybe we can postpone that for next week.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, apart from this, I had one more point about the reviewership and the quality expectation, what we are thinking about. What kind of code quality is okay for the self release? Like, for example, uh, the PRs that I have submitted, there are a couple of to dos in that. Like, is it necessary to complete or fix all those to dos, or we can, or on what basis should we actually be deciding that this is okay for this alpha and this is not okay for this alpha? Uh, Only discussion or the cycles of discussion on issues. There might be some expedited way for that, right? This is why I have put this is because I think some uh, I don't know, maybe because we need some cross reviewership also, so some progress might be slow especially for items which we are working on?
So it looks like Paul's having trouble with some of his audio.
Oh,
But I think if I'm understanding you right, you're wanting to basically figure out if the existing PRs, if certain to-dos need to be addressed before the alpha release,
yep.
and you wanted to discuss that. I think that makes sense, yeah, to discuss. I don't know that we have the right people in this meeting today. I know like Maru's out, Paul's here as well, but maybe postponing that to next week makes the most sense.
Okay, yeah. So what I'll do, so next week's meeting, we can actually make up a list of items which ideally we should discuss, and uh, by that time we should ideally also have gone one round of you know some reconciliation on the issues that are created against the milestone. That seems to be okay, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I know that I actually just got through Shashi's PR, provided some feedback there. So
Mhm.
apologize for the delay on that.
Okay.
Sure, no
Okay.
problem, Ivan.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, sorry about that. I've been having some issues with my audio and my stuff.
Paul, you at least to me you were breaking. Like, yes, couldn't hear you completely.
Yeah, I can't hear.
I might need to use the phone audio connect. Sorry about that.
Okay. Meanwhile, Paul figures that out. Is there anything else, Ivan or anybody else that we might want to talk today?
I think at some point, it doesn't have to be now, but we should probably discuss kind of long-term testing strategy for some of the capabilities. So like, for example, the DNS stuff that's going in does tend to require a load balancer in order to kind of fully test end-to-end. I believe in K Federation, we were using Google's cloud to do some of that, but it required Google's intervention. So I think at some point we probably want to think about whether it makes sense to get testing coverage on some of those things that require having or testing on a provider that has a load balancer implementation in Kubernetes, and what we want to consider doing for those cases.
Yep, it makes sense to me. Plus, I am under the assumption that some of that test can be achieved using some workarounds, like some solutions which can sort of fake the load balancer type by creating local node ports. Uh, I think it's Shashi. You have used something called Metal LB once, right?
Yeah, I think it's not faking, but it's one implementation of a load balancer. So that's available. But what is I think more difficult here is I think having a complete end-to-end setup like we had in Federation, and we need to consistently do maintain it actually. So now most of the test infrastructure right now is outside the test infra mostly, right? I
Yep.
think there's a Travis CI right now. So if at all we need to build, I think we need to maybe copy the whatever we have in V1 to over, and we need to start maintaining it. So the bringing of the federation, everything we should try to automate in there. I think automation is not a difficult stuff. Mostly the decision on whether we'll continue to use the test infra kind of a setup, because particularly multi-cluster was difficult, because most of the tests in Kubernetes right now is a single cluster setups, and we need a multi-cluster E2E setups. And whatever we use in Federation V1 was a kind of obsolete method, and there was no stable multi-clusters test setups actually. That was an issue in V1 also. So
Sorry, Shashi, I'm not quite clear on that. We did have multi-cluster end-to-end tests for V1 at some point.
yeah,
Because
we
they were all
definitely had that.
passing, and
So
we had many tests. So
yeah, actually, the whole thing was built up using the cluster scripts, cluster bring up scripts, and that was going to go out. And we had an for partially we had using Kubernetes Anywhere, but that project didn't go well, I think. So now we need. So most of the guys are uh, turning to cluster API for tools to bring up the cluster. And definitely there is nothing which can bring up multiple clusters as of now.
so up there single clusters for end-to-end tests.
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
Now, the question is, what are they using? Cluster API?
That was a proposed method to bring up, but that was also under development, and most of the guys are still using the old whatever they were using it. But it is, if at all, and there is any problem with that, I think there is less help on that actually.
Can folks hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I think in this area, one thing that we have to decide for ourselves is how much testing do we think is sufficient with like a fake cluster on the receiving end of Federation, or a set of fake clusters versus actual cloud providers. I can easily imagine actual cloud provider clusters to be like very flaky to test with. But I also think that we need to have some degree of CI that probably works using real clusters. I know that Maru has been a big proponent of using fake clusters as targets for testing. So I guess we ought to think about to what extent can we get away with that versus if we have features that actually integrate with cloud providers that we want to test in CI.
Yeah, I guess we can take a call specific to features.
Carry on.
Hello, was I audible? Like I couldn't clearly hear you, Quentin. I think you were trying to speak something.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to throw my 2 cents in. Yeah, so I think it is valuable to have fast and reliable fake cluster tests, and particularly when it comes to doing large numbers of clusters. And as I mentioned in yesterday's call, Cisco have actually stepped up. They've got 2 full-time engineers, and their plan for the next couple of months is to build fake cluster testing setup along the lines of what did we call it in Kubernetes? We had the way of creating fake clusters with fake nodes for building large clusters.
Hollow nodes, hollow clusters.
Yeah,
Is that maybe?
That sounds the words that was used to describe it. There was another term for it, but either way, those were useful for scalability testing in particular. And I think they're also, assuming that we can bring up these fake clusters much quicker than we can bring up real clusters, I think it has value in being able to do, high velocity end-to-end tests. But I also think, I agree with you, Paul, I think we need, my suggestion would be that we pick a canonical public cloud provider. And realistically, it's probably either Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. And choose one of those as like the minimal set of public clouds that we want to be able to run regular end-to-end tests on, and then invite other parties to augment that with additional cloud providers. Yeah, that would be my...
That seems sensible. So while we're on that subject, actually, and I don't wish to rat hole on this, but I wonder if anybody in the group has background on how like the economics of cloud provider clusters for testing Kubernetes work. Does anybody know how any of that stuff is financed?
Yeah, I have some background on that. It might be a little out now, but basically all of the Kubernetes CI end-to-end, the bots and stuff that run against the repository and verify that things pass before they merge. That was all sponsored by Google. And I can mention the numbers, the actual dollar figures of what that costs. I'm not sure if I should, but it was a pretty substantial amount, but there appeared to be no big problem with funding that. And yeah, so I think within, reasonable limits, and it was, in the many tens of thousands of dollars a month range.
Mm-hmm.
That was not seen as a major obstacle at the time. I don't know if that's changed. We could verify. I don't know if there's anyone from Google at the moment who can comment on that, but that was certainly the status a couple of years ago.
So the Cisco folks that you mentioned, Quentin, is that specifically for Federation or just in general to have like hollow clusters to test with?
Specifically for Federation. So they approached me and they wanted to work on Federation V2 in particular, and I gave them a couple of options of areas they might want to contribute to, and they chose that one. And so they're going to go and build some structure for us to go and do that.
That sounds great.
One other comment on the previous topic. I would hope that for the most part, the functionality in Federation V2 is independent of specific cloud providers, and that the cloud provider specific code resides mostly in the clusters. And that might be a pipe dream, but looking back to V1, there was very little that was cloud provider specific. The one exception would have been the federated ingress controller. But it was a very limited amount of code.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Quentin. I think the touch point that we have right now is with DNS, but that's handled via external DNS. So
yeah, exactly.
In terms of, at this moment, conceptually, what we have in terms of cloud provider exposure is that.
Yeah, and even that is such a narrow interface that, yeah, I guess the exposure is fairly low.
It's likely that once we get to talking about stateful applications, that this will change significantly, at least in the sense of like our exposure to different cloud providers. I think though that the goal of keeping as much of Federation V2 to be cloud provider agnostic as possible is a very good one.
Cool. Yeah, I guess networking is the other area where there might be cloud provider specific networking. As soon as you get into VPCs and networking between clusters, things potentially become
Yeah.
more cloud provider specific. Although with some things like Istio might help us prevent that.
Did my audio issues prevent me from catching the section about like alpha release of this meeting?
Yeah, Paul. So uh, Ivan had some comments on that. So what I mentioned was like, do we want to reconcile the list of items in today's meeting as to what Red Hat is thinking about the list of features that should be alpha, should be part of the alpha release, and what Huawei does. So we thought that we'll create individual issues, marking them against the milestone alpha in the repo, and we can all of us can go through the GitHub issues. Maybe we won't need a sync in the next meeting, or if we need any points to talk, we can talk in the next meeting.
I was going to suggest.
Okay.
Carry on, Paul.
I was just going to throw my 2 cents in. In terms of, like, in general, I think the bar for an initial alpha release is like really, really low. And so I think that we should keep that in mind. And like what I've done in other areas of, like in Service Catalog, for example, is we did an O.O.1 like initial alpha release, and then just every week released what was in master, basically. I think the primary question to me before we cut an initial alpha release would be, what do we want the experience to be like of setting up a new federation? And I do think that we should integrate with the cluster registry CRD, which is cluster registry version 0.0.5. And Lindsay is going to be working on that this week. That specific piece of bumping the cluster registry dev. So EOF on that for me.
Yeah. So from this
Cool.
point,
Yeah,
actually, there was. Go ahead, Quinton. Sorry.
No, you carry on, Irfan.
Yeah, so I actually did put in one more point to talk. That was about the reviewership and the code quality expectations for the alpha release. So I think you answered that question. I only hope is, see, the main point is that either I or Shashi do not have any rights on the V2 repo as of now. So we just hope that we also get that similar leverage, like we can iteratively improve the features that we are working on.
Yeah, so my own predisposition temperamentally, like especially when we're talking about alpha, is like I do not believe that alpha features should have to be fully formed as they go in the sense of like I don't think, for example, that we have to gate pulls on having docs that come with a feature. I also think that it's probably a point in this particular project where it's more important to have like integration tests than really thorough unit coverage. So I like I said earlier, I think the bar is not like extraordinarily high. So we can play it by ear, but in general, I would kind of think of just my own personal opinion. I think Maru would probably want to provide his opinion too next week. But my own personal opinion would be like, probably focus on integration tests. We don't need to gate polls on being perfect. And I'm personally a big proponent of iterative development. So I'm all about smaller changes that go in faster than if you have like a big chunk that's a self-contained thing for a large feature. Like that tends to be very hard and costly to review.
Yes, point noted, Paul.
Yeah, I agree with you. One caveat there was that the main purpose of alpha is to get feedback from users. So I think
Yep.
that should be a goal that we're very clearly aware of and explicitly address. So in particular, in order to get feedback from users, they need to be able to go through a getting started guidance and say, right, have a set of canned user experiences that actually work, at least
Yep.
to production quality, but I should be able to bring up a control plane, and I should be able to go through creating a federated replica set or whatever and actually have it behave as it's intended to behave
Yeah.
without too much pain. And I think that level of documentation is required in order to, say this thing is alpha. If we say
Yeah,
it's alpha
I agree,
and there's no
Quentin.
documentation and nobody can actually use it, then we haven't produced a useful alpha.
Yeah, I agree. So that's sort of what I had in mind when I mentioned what's the experience of getting started with it.
Yeah.
What we have for Service Catalog is a walkthrough document that has installation instructions and then like a sample use case that you can go through step by step and like walk through what commands do you run and like what does all this stuff mean, that kind of thing, to get you through the basics like of the essential use case of Service Catalog. It sounds like what the version of that is for Federation would be like, given that I have a cluster or two already started, I should be able to add those into a Federation and create a federated replica set and change the replica counts and see it updating in the clusters, or maybe something on that level. And like, as you walk through the steps,
Yeah, exactly. And
especially
for
in the
9 out of
part
10
where
users,
you're, sorry, you kind of cut out there for me.
Sorry, I think I have bad audio on my end. I was just saying, and yes, for 9 out of 10 users, let's say, that works, as described. And there's still some flakiness.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we actually have an E2E test, like a script in Service Catalog that goes through the steps to the walkthrough so that the walkthrough document is covered by continuous integration. Seems like that is probably something that we'd want to replicate for Federation V2.
Yeah, we actually had an issue. Somebody was already kind of requesting ways to get started, and while we do have a development guide as like the README in the root of the repo, we do still need to create a user's guide, and we do have a script that will go through kind of the end-to-end setup and deployment of the Federation version 2 along with the cluster registry, kind of the necessary pieces. And then I've kind of captured the demo that I previously did to the SIG is captured on a personal repo, but that might be a good starting point for like an actual tutorial that users can go through to just play around with the V2 stuff and see how it works.
So Ivan, would you be willing to produce like a first rough cut of a walkthrough document that is like corresponds to what that script does?
So the development guide is really already documenting that. But the user's guide would need to be created and probably at least reference it so we don't duplicate documentation. But the script already does walk through exactly what the development README has you do manually.
Okay, well, maybe it's as simple as just moving that to be differentiate, like for the setup stuff to be differentiated as like a user guide, and like the development guide can reference that.
Yeah, there's definitely a need to reorganize some of the docs and create a user documentation that that folks can follow. I'll work on creating an issue so we can track that, because that's
Okay.
definitely
Perfect.
a necessity for alpha, I think.
Cool. So I'm hearing that we seem to have like a fair amount of consensus on that should be part of the first alpha release, and like I'm personally interested in having like the first alpha release happen sometime soon. It sounds like that's what is in other people's heads too. Alpha release soon. It should have walkthrough that you can use to get started and work with it and understand what's going on, and should integrate with cluster registry as a CRD. Sounds like is what we're at now.
Yeah, I think the other hurdle is going to be the release strategy on this. And right now we're sort of in a state of flux where we're trying to migrate away from API server builder to queue builder. So it's potentially going to require a different tool set to actually deploy the V2 stuff. So we'll just need to come up with kind of a release strategy to figure out what we want that first initial experience to be.
Yeah, my suggestion on... Yep, Paul, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, that's a good point. But as long as we keep that like walkthrough document up to date with what the steps are to install and use Federation, I don't think that is something that needs to impact like the release process. And in terms of, oh, actually, so this does make me think though that we should probably set up like a Quay or other image registry account for Federation and do image builds, starting with like a canary build of what's in master. And then when we do the first alpha release, we should push a tagged image somewhere for you to use when you deploy Federation onto your cluster. I will capture an issue for that.
Yeah, that sounds logical, Paul. I think by the time we cut out a release, we would need image location like that. What I was going to say is about the possible move to a different infrastructure of Cube Builder. I think, in my opinion, the functionality is what matters more to me as a user for alpha release, so that I can try out what are the possible things that I can in the Federation V2, rather than it is actually being set up using API server builder aggregation kind of a thing, or actual CRD. I think moving to CRD should be orthogonal to the release, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to hold things up for that either. And I was actually going to just clarify, Paul, you mentioned release in alpha soon. Previously, we've certainly internally while we've been talking about the end of June as that date. Is that consistent with your definition of soon?
Yes. Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Okay, great. So what I was going to suggest actually, Irfan, you mentioned earlier that we have a bunch of outstanding issues tagged against that release, and we want to triage them. Given that we have 5 weeks to the end of June, I was thinking we should at least do a first pass through those today. I know Maru's not here, but we can certainly tag the ones that we didn't know the answers to, or Maru can then go through our provisionally triaged list and put his opinions in. But it seems waiting another 2 weeks, taking it from 5 weeks to release till 3 weeks to release is probably not the right thing to do. Does that make sense?
No, Quinton, I haven't created those feature issues in the repo as of yet. That's what I mentioned. So I have a list of those items, which is not an explained list of those items. So I am yet to create.
So in that case, I would suggest that we capture that list, and I would suggest we capture it and triage it sooner than 2 weeks' time. Like,
I think next week
So-
is what we are talking about, right? Next week, Federation Workgroup Sync, we should have already triaged them.
Okay.
So just for the record, so folks know what's in my own head, if we had the repo as it is today and it integrated with the latest version of the cluster registry, like the CRD version of it, and we had the walkthrough document and an image build, I would be totally happy to release that as the first alpha release. Like I personally see no need to block on any features for the first alpha release, because we can push alpha releases like weekly if we want to. So just let me be explicit about that in terms of what my own opinion is.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Paul. Oh, go ahead, Ivan. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that seems to make sense. My initial suggestion was just to keep in mind that the release strategy that we plan on setting for the first release. It's not that we necessarily need to wait and move into KubeBuild or anything, but we should keep in mind that the user documentation will be in a bit of state of flux for at least the short foreseeable future, and we'll just need to keep that up to date. I do also think we should wait to get Maru's opinion on this as well before we make a decision on that.
Yep, we can do that. From Huawei's side, what I can say is that we would want at least two features that Shashi and I have been working on, the higher level features also to be part of this release. Ideally, it'll like push both the developers and reviewers or whoever are approvers to actually, move ahead faster.
Yeah, I
that makes sense to
would
me.
definitely like to have those as part of the first release. That sounds like an awesome idea.
Yep.
Cool. I was actually going
and,
to volunteer
just
to
address. Sorry, go ahead, Quentin.
I was just going to volunteer to be a guinea pig, and I could do once the getting started guide has been written, even if it's just in draft form, I can go through that and actually be a guinea pig and do a getting started exercise, bringing up a federation and doing the basic tests manually, if that helps.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. In fact, I am committed to do a demo next week, so I will be trying to get it set up with or without those in the next few days.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we all have a common understanding of what it is we're releasing and how likely it is to be able to get good alpha feedback.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have to drop now, folks. I'm on PTO this week, but I wanted to work in this meeting. So I will talk to you all next week or sooner, and see you later.
Sure. Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
I have just one more item before we. I just wanted to appraise about one of the issues. Ivan, you might be one of the right guys to actually tell about that. So I did update that against my PR. The issue basically is so far we have had in E2E and in integration also, we had only one test fixture setup because we probably are running CRUD against different set of APIs in a loop. So the fixture happens once. In case I want to run multiple specs, for some reason, the globals are persisted across the different API server initializations. So API server at some point cribs saying that this API or this group or this version already is registered. So the best mechanism to do that would be in integration to set up a suite kind of a thing, and all the other tests are individual specs against the same integration setup API server, or there might be some better mechanism to do that. You have any points or comments for that?
Yeah, I took a quick look at that failure. It did seem interesting. Like it was already complaining that the group was already registered, I believe, and
Well,
so
I actually did I did the analysis of where the failure, why the failure was happening, and I have updated some point on the same PR. So if you haven't already looked at it, you can have a look at, and we can talk offline also.
okay. Yeah, I think to your point though, it may since everything is in one binary, it may make sense to have a separate setup prior to running like the individual suites. It might make
Yep.
sense to like set up the federation for all of the different individual tests, and then have a teardown afterwards and being able to run them all together. It would start mimicking more of the end-to-end setup though.
Yeah, that is where I was a little concerned. Like, then where exactly does the difference remain in integration and E2E if we sort of do that, right?
Yeah. I think one thing we need to think about though is because right now there's a bit of overlap. The integration test runs, so the end-to-end has like 3 different modes. It has a managed, unmanaged, and hybrid mode. I won't go into detail into each of those. We try to document a little bit in the development README on each of those. But the managed mode is really effectively doing the same thing that integration test
As
is doing.
integration, yeah.
So we may eventually look at, I probably need to consolidate those two and figure out what long-term we want to do. The end-to-end test does use Ginkgo, whereas the integration does not. And it does seem like there's a bit of overhead in speed and being able to run tests, whereas integration runs it a bit faster than the EDE stuff. So we do need to figure out kind of maybe we get rid of the managed mode and end-to-end, or maybe we just use the end-to-end stuff for even integration tests. But that's probably a conversation we should have.
Yeah, we can talk later offline. Okay, yeah. I don't have any additional stuff to talk in today's meeting. Anybody else has any point, we can, or we will see each other in the next sync.
I think that's
Okay,
it for me.
I think, yep, that's it.
Irfan,
Yep.
just one last thing. I missed the first few minutes of the meeting. Did you mention the fact that we don't have a design document yet?
Sorry, I did not point that out. That is something which is supposed to be pointed out. So yeah, so prior to this meeting, I had a chat with Quinton, and Quinton's mentioned that we actually came up with a design document after a couple of months of brainstorming and sync. And if there is a gap between that document and what is implemented right now, either the at least the documentation should be updated to reflect the current state. Or Quinton, if you want to update anything, like I have missed some point that what you are pointing at, you can probably update.
Yeah, that was just my concern, was that we hadn't agreed upon design. We've built something different than the design, and we haven't documented what we've built. We need to reconcile the design document with what we built.
Yeah, one of us probably needs to take that as an exercise.
Yeah, I think so. Do you see, I'm not sure that there's, at least it seems like there's not a lot of divergence. It shouldn't be too large of a task. Do you all agree with that?
Yeah, I sort of agree. I sort of see the current implementation is as a little moved into a layered kind of an approach rather than all APIs being augmentary or supplementing each other in what Quinton had proposed. Plus, in Quinton's document, the API names and field spec probably specified some things which are not necessarily followed currently. Uh, these are the two main points which we differ as of now. So, Quinton, would it be okay if we reconcile the document to update uh, what is being currently implemented?
Yeah, yes, I would like that to happen. The mechanics of it, either we just put comments on the document first to just illustrate what exactly has diverged, and then update the document accordingly. That's fine, as long as we can keep, as long as there's some approximation of a diff somewhere along the line, so we can see what the difference is.
Okay.
And maybe document history is good enough. I mean, just update the document. We can always go back. Google Docs has a diff function where you can see the difference between different versions.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, probably I'll try to update the document. And
Can we do that
comments,
before the meeting next week, Wednesday?
I think we should be able to. I should be able to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Irfan.
Yeah. Okay then. I'll see you guys in the next video.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.